My boss fired me after 25 years to seal a $15 million deal, then he came crawling back, shaking. The sun had barely risen over the city skyline when I walked into the office that morning. It was just another day, or so I thought. 25 years of my life had been poured into this company, every ounce of energy and dedication channeled into making it what it was today. I wasn't just an employee, I was part of its foundation, its soul. And yet, as I sat in the cold leather chair across from him, staring at the man who had once called me his most trusted ally, I realized how little loyalty truly meant in the grand scheme of things. "You've done incredible work here," he began, his voice steady but devoid of warmth. His eyes darted to the papers on his desk, avoiding mine altogether. "But we're moving in a new direction now. A fresh start." I blinked, certain I'd misheard him. Surely, after all these years, there must be some mistake. But no, the words came again, sharper this time, like shards of glass slicing through the air. "We're letting you go, Claire." Letting me go? The phrase echoed in my mind, hollow and surreal. My hands trembled slightly as they rested on my lap, though I willed them to stay still. How could he say those words with such ease? Did he not remember the late nights I spent poring over contracts, the weekends sacrificed for deadlines, the countless times I stepped up when others faltered? Or had he forgotten everything except the bottom line? "It's business," he continued, almost apologetically, though his tone betrayed nothing more than thinly veiled indifference. "This deal, it's worth $15 million. We can't afford any distractions right now." Distractions. That's what I had become, a distraction. Not the woman who helped build this empire from the ground up, not the person who knew every corner of the company better than anyone else. Just a distraction standing between him and his precious deal. As I left the building for the last time, clutching the box of belongings I'd hastily packed, anger burned deep within me. But beneath the rage lay something far more painful, betrayal. This wasn't just about losing a job, it was about losing a piece of myself. For 2 decades, I had given everything to this place, only to be discarded without a second thought. And for what? $15 million? Was that really all I was worth? Days turned into weeks, and the sting of dismissal didn't fade, it festered. Every email notification made my heart race, hoping against hope that it might be a message from someone offering condolences or support. Instead, silence greeted me. Friends from the office stopped responding to texts. Colleagues I'd mentored avoided my calls. Even clients I'd nurtured for years seemed to vanish overnight. It was as if I'd never existed at all. At first, I tried to convince myself that I didn't need them. I told myself I was strong enough to move forward alone. But loneliness has a way of creeping in when you least expect it, wrapping itself around your chest until breathing feels like an effort. Nights were the hardest. The quiet hum of my empty apartment became unbearable, each tick of the clock reminding me of how much time I'd wasted chasing validation from people who would never truly value me. And then there were the questions, the endless, relentless questions. What had I done wrong? Where had I failed? Had I been too trusting, too loyal? Too blind to see the writing on the wall? These thoughts consumed me, gnawing at my confidence until I barely recognized the woman staring back at me in the mirror. Gone was the confident leader who commanded boardrooms with poise and grace. In her place stood someone fragile, uncertain, and utterly lost. But amidst the chaos of self-doubt, a spark of defiance began to flicker. Maybe I couldn't change what had happened, but I refused to let it define me. If they wanted to erase me from their narrative, fine. I would write my own story, one where I emerged stronger, wiser, and unbreakable. Meanwhile, whispers of the company's newfound success reached me through mutual acquaintances. They'd secured the $15 million deal, of course. Celebratory dinners were held, champagne bottles popped, and accolades showered upon the team that made it happen. Everyone except me. The irony wasn't lost on me, my absence had paved the way for their triumph. Yet, despite their victory, something felt off. Rumors started circulating, subtle at first but growing louder with each passing week. Projects stalled. Deadlines slipped. Clients grew restless. Without me there to smooth out the wrinkles, cracks began to form in the polished facade they'd worked so hard to maintain. It was almost poetic, watching the very foundation I'd helped construct crumble under the weight of arrogance and greed. Still, I couldn't bring myself to gloat. Part of me still cared too deeply about the company, and the people in it, to take pleasure in their struggles. But another part of me wondered, would they ever realize what they'd thrown away? Would they regret their decision before it was too late? One rainy afternoon, as I sipped coffee at a small cafe near my apartment, my phone buzzed unexpectedly. A name flashed across the screen, one I hadn't seen in months. Him. My former boss. My stomach churned as I hesitated, debating whether to answer. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. "Claire," he said, his voice trembling slightly. I need to talk to you." For a moment, I considered hanging up. Let him stew in the mess he'd created. But something in his tone stopped me. Vulnerability. Desperation. Whatever armor he'd worn during our final meeting had clearly been stripped away. "What do you want?" I asked coolly, masking the storm of emotions swirling inside me. It's falling apart," he admitted, his words tumbling out in a rush. "The deal, the projects, the clients, everything. We underestimated how much you did behind the scenes. Without you, we're drowning." His confession hit me like a punch to the gut. Satisfaction warred with sadness as I processed his words. Here he was, finally acknowledging my worth, but only after realizing he couldn't survive without me. Did he honestly think I'd come running back just because he asked? "I don't know what you expect me to do," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. "You fired me, remember? You chose the deal over me. Over us." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, heavy with unspoken regret. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost pleading. "I made a mistake, Claire. A huge one. Please, can we meet? Just hear me out." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was pride. Or perhaps deep down, I still held onto a sliver of hope that redemption was possible, for both of us. When I arrived at the cafe where we'd arranged to meet, he was already there, sitting at a corner table with his head bowed. For the first time, I noticed how tired he looked. The confident, polished executive I'd known was gone, replaced by a man weighed down by guilt and desperation. As I approached, he stood abruptly, his hand shaking as he extended one toward me. "Claire," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "I can't tell you how sorry I am. Firing you, it was the biggest mistake of my career. Of my life." I studied him carefully, searching for sincerity in his expression. Could I trust him? More importantly, did I even want to? "Why now?" I asked bluntly. "Why reach out after all this time?" He sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Because I'm desperate. Because I've ruined everything I worked so hard to build. Because I miss having you by my side, not just as an employee, but as a friend." His words struck a chord, stirring memories of the camaraderie we'd once shared. There had been a time when we were partners in every sense of the word, navigating challenges together and celebrating victories as a team. Somewhere along the way, that partnership had been sacrificed for ambition and greed. But was it too late to reclaim it? "I don't know if I can forgive you," I admitted softly. "What you did, it hurt more than you'll ever understand." "I know," he whispered, his eyes filled with remorse. "And I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. To earn back your trust." As I listened to his plea, a strange mixture of emotions washed over me. Anger, sorrow, empathy, and even a glimmer of hope intertwined, leaving me unsure of what to feel, or what to do next. One thing was certain though, this conversation was far from over. The weight of his words hung in the air between us, thick and unrelenting. I could see the desperation etched into every line of his face, the dark circles under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands as he clasped his coffee cup like a lifeline. He was unraveling before me, the man who had once exuded confidence and control, now reduced to a shadow of himself. And yet, despite everything, there was something undeniably human about him in that moment. Vulnerability has a way of stripping away pretense, revealing the raw truth beneath. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I need your help, Claire. The company, it's not just struggling, it's on the verge of collapse. Clients are pulling out left and right. Morale is at an all-time low. People are leaving faster than we can hire replacements." He paused, swallowing hard. "And honestly, it feels like karma. Like the universe is punishing me for what I did to you." His admission caught me off guard. Part of me wanted to revel in his downfall, to let him wallow in the consequences of his own actions. After all, hadn't he chosen profit over people when he fired me? Hadn't he prioritized a deal over decades of loyalty and dedication? But another part of me, the part that still cared deeply about the company and the people within it, couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. If things were truly as bad as he said, then innocent employees would suffer alongside him. Families would be impacted. Lives would be upended. You brought this on yourself, I said finally, my tone measured but firm. You made your choice when you decided I was expendable. Now you have to live with the fallout. He nodded slowly, accepting my judgment without argument. I know. Believe me, I know. But if there's any chance at all, that you might consider coming back, even just temporarily, I'll do whatever it takes. Name your terms. Your salary. Your title. Anything. His offer startled me. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to imagine walking back into that building, reclaiming my place at the table. What would it feel like to walk through those doors again, not as someone who'd been cast aside, but as someone indispensable? Someone irreplaceable? The thought sent a shiver down my spine, equal parts exhilaration and dread. But then reality set in. Could I really go back after everything that had happened? Could I trust him, or anyone else in that company, to value me the way they should have all along? Or would I simply be setting myself up for more heartache? I need time to think, I told him, rising from my seat. This isn't a decision I can make lightly. He looked as though he wanted to protest, to beg me to stay, but instead, he simply nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. Just, please don't write us off completely. We're not beyond saving. Not yet. That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, images of the past flooded my mind. The late nights spent strategizing in conference rooms, the celebratory dinners after landing major accounts, the quiet moments of camaraderie shared with colleagues who had since turned their backs on me. Memories collided with doubts, hope wrestled with fear, and anger battled forgiveness. My emotions were a tangled web, impossible to untangle. By morning, exhaustion had settled heavily over me, but clarity began to emerge. No matter how betrayed I felt, no matter how much pain lingered from his betrayal, one thing was undeniable: I loved that company. Not because of him or the deals or the accolades, but because of the work itself. Because of the impact it had on its clients and employees. Because of the legacy I had helped build. To let it crumble now, to let others bear the brunt of his mistakes, felt wrong. Almost cowardly. Still, going back wasn't something I could do blindly. If I returned, it would have to be on my terms. On my turf. And so, after hours of deliberation, I drafted a proposal. A bold, audacious plan that would not only save the company, but also ensure that history wouldn't repeat itself. When I arrived at the office the next day, invited by him, though I insisted on dictating the terms, I carried the proposal with me, tucked neatly inside my bag. The familiar holes felt foreign yet achingly familiar, each step stirring memories both sweet and bitter. As I entered the boardroom where I'd spent countless hours leading meetings, I found him waiting for me, flanked by a handful of senior executives. Their expressions ranged from hopeful to skeptical, but none of them spoke as I took my seat at the head of the table. Before we begin, I said, my voice steady and commanding, there are conditions. Non-negotiable ones. I slid the proposal across the table, watching as they exchanged wary glances before opening it. Inside were detailed plans for restructuring the company, not just financially, but culturally. New policies designed to empower employees. Initiatives aimed at fostering transparency and accountability. And most importantly, safeguards to prevent anyone from being treated as disposable ever again. This isn't charity, I added, meeting his gaze directly. If I come back, it's not because I owe you anything. It's because I believe in this company, and in the people who depend on it. But if you want me here, you'll agree to these changes. All of them. Silence filled the room as they pored over the document, their faces reflecting a mix of surprise and apprehension. Finally, he looked up, his expression resolute. Done, he said simply. Whatever it takes. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was close enough. Close enough for me to take a leap of faith, to step back into a world that had once broken me. Whether it would heal or hurt remained to be seen. But one thing was certain, this time, I wouldn't let myself be erased. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity, each day bringing new challenges and opportunities to prove myself, not to them but to me. Returning to the company felt like stepping into a house I once called home, only to find it in disarray. The walls were still standing, but the foundation was cracked, and the roof leaked. My task was not merely to patch things up, it was to rebuild entirely. From the moment I walked back through those doors, I made it clear that this wasn't business as usual. Gone were the days of empty promises and hollow gestures. Every policy I implemented, every decision I made, was rooted in one guiding principle: respect. Respect for the people who showed up every day, pouring their energy into work that often went unnoticed. Respect for the clients who trusted us with their livelihoods. And yes, even respect for him, the man who had wronged me so deeply yet now relied on me to save what he had nearly destroyed. At first, resistance bubbled beneath the surface. Some executives bristled at the changes, clinging to old habits like lifelines. Others whispered behind closed doors, questioning whether I truly had the authority, or the competence, to lead such a massive overhaul. But I didn't have time for doubt, theirs or mine. I dove headfirst into the chaos, tackling problems with a ferocity that surprised even myself. Late nights became the norm again, though this time, I wasn't alone. Slowly but surely, a small group of colleagues began to rally around me, drawn by the vision I painted for the future, a future where loyalty wasn't just expected but earned. One of the most significant shifts came when I introduced mandatory town hall meetings. These weren't the polished presentations of yesteryear, filled with carefully curated statistics and vague assurances. No, these were raw, unfiltered conversations where employees could voice their concerns without fear of retribution. At first, silence dominated the room, the weight of years of suppressed grievances too heavy to lift. But then, one brave soul spoke up, a young intern who had been overlooked and undervalued since her first day. Her words opened the floodgates, and soon, others followed suit. Tears were shed. Apologies were offered. Promises were made. Sitting there amidst the vulnerability and courage, I couldn't help but glance at him. He sat quietly, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. For the first time, I saw him not as my adversary but as someone grappling with the enormity of his own failures. It wasn't absolution, it couldn't be, but it was progress. As the months passed, the tide began to turn. Clients who had threatened to leave reconsidered after seeing tangible improvements in our processes and communication. Employees who had been on the verge of quitting found renewed purpose, inspired by the culture shift taking root. Even the board members, initially skeptical of my methods, started to acknowledge the positive impact. Revenue stabilized, morale improved, and slowly but surely, the company began to resemble the thriving entity it had once been. But perhaps the most surprising development was the relationship between him and me. What had begun as a fragile truce evolved into something neither of us anticipated: partnership. Not the kind built on blind trust or shared ambition, but one forged in the fires of accountability and mutual growth. We met regularly, hashing out strategies and addressing lingering issues. Sometimes, our discussions grew heated, old wounds flaring under the pressure of high-stakes decisions. Yet, despite the tension, we always returned to the same understanding: we were stronger together than apart. There were moments when forgiveness felt within reach, fleeting glimpses of what might have been if circumstances had been different. But forgiveness wasn't something I gave easily, not anymore. Instead, I focused on moving forward, channeling my energy into creating a legacy that no one could erase. Then came the day when everything changed again. It started innocuously enough, a phone call during a routine meeting. His expression shifted subtly, his brow furrowing as he listened intently to whoever was on the other end. When he hung up, his face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he turned to me. "Claire," he said, his voice barely audible. "We need to talk. Privately." Something in his tone sent a chill down my spine. I nodded, excusing myself from the meeting and following him to his office. The door clicked shut behind us, sealing us off from the rest of the world. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. He hesitated, pacing the length of the room before stopping abruptly. "That was legal," he said finally. They're suing us. A former client. Allegations of fraud. Mismanagement. Breach of contract." My stomach dropped. "What? That's impossible. We've been transparent about everything. Not everything, he interrupted, his voice cracking. There's something I haven't told you. Something I should have told you months ago. And then, piece by agonizing piece, the truth unraveled. He revealed a secret deal he'd made before my return, a desperate gamble to secure funding that involved falsifying reports. The weight of his confession crushed the fragile trust we'd rebuilt. I didn't know how to fix it, he admitted, his voice breaking. So I buried it. And now, it's all falling apart. For the first time, I saw him not as a boss or adversary, but as a man drowning in choices he couldn't undo. We'll face this together, I said finally, surprising even myself. But this time, no more lies. No shortcuts. As we prepared for the legal battle ahead, I realized forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, it was about choosing to move forward despite the scars. Together we stood at the edge of uncertainty, ready to fight for what remained, not just of the company but of us. And though the road ahead was daunting, one truth anchored me: some things are worth saving, even if they break you first. In the end, redemption isn't perfect, it's messy, painful, and achingly human. But sometimes, that's enough.